Good evening. My name's Ken Garrison, retired pastor of Fellowship Church in Castleberry, Florida, and director of the Zamok Institute for Biblical Studies. For the past few weeks, we have been considering the question of heaven and earth. We want to try to define, biblically speaking, what is meant by these terms, heaven and earth. You know, in the very first verse of the Bible, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, the earth we're pretty comfortable with because that's where we have our being, four-dimensional space that our life is defined in. We want to think of heaven, and we have developed the thesis that heaven is a parallel space, a multi-dimensional space, parallel to space-time where we have our living. We've developed that theme, and we suggested also that science has backed into, I would call it backed into, somewhat of a same idea of a parallel space. If you will do a search engine on string theory, you'll find that they describe additional spaces that they have had to add to in order for their mathematics to work. Having to add 7 additional spaces. So we suspect that they may have, mathematically at least, backed into something that we might call heaven. If not heaven, then a parallel space of the likeness of what we're talking about here. In our second session, we recited the incidents recorded in the Bible that actually indicate travel between heaven and earth to heaven, back and forth. Many incidences of this nature are recorded in the Bible, and so I think when we read through these things, we're accustomed to reading them, and it doesn't really register in our minds just how incredible these events that are described in the Bible actually are. But they're incredible. And we cited any number of those in our second session. Now, we also want to suggest that, well, not suggest, it's just a simple truth, that these events recorded in the Bible all took place, or almost all took place, in a very small geographical area in the heart of what we know as the modern state of Israel. If you go in the north from Shechem to the south to Beersheba, in that area, there's a mountain range, just the peak of a mountain range running north and south, and in that small area, maybe 30 miles wide or so, in that small area, 30 miles wide, maybe 90, 100 miles long, we have the vast majority of these events where individuals or individual entities have traveled heaven to earth, earth to heaven. And so we suggested to you in the previous session that this is the reason why this area is so highly contested. We cited the scriptures, 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 16, where God said that he would establish his name in this place forever. And so that is the reason we believe that there is such a struggle for control of this area. Now, we want to talk today about global empires because what we find in history is that global empires have always struggled to control this specific geographical area. And so the first incident or situation that we want to talk about is actually recorded in the Bible in Genesis 10 and 11, and it actually is prehistoric. We'd say it's prehistoric. It's the story of Babel. Now in chapter 10, verses 8 through 10 of Genesis, we have the account of this individual called Nimrod, who we will call a tyrant, a global dictator. And it says that the beginning of his empire is Babel. And so we want to talk about Babel in just a minute. Now, all of you, if you know the Bible at all, or have ever been taught, you know, of course, the prophecies of an end-time one-world government, Antichrist government. Well, we want to suggest to you that Nimrod's Babel represents a prototype of that end-type so-called Antichrist government. And so that's why we want to talk about him for just a moment today. Now, you know, of course, the story of Babel, that they were established contrary to the stated will of God, and they were establishing, it says, a name for themselves. In other words, an independent authority outside of God's authority, and they were all in unity, one language. And as a result of that, God must have seen the threat of what they were doing significant enough that he intervened. He destroyed the work of Babel by confusing their languages, and they scattered out into all directions. And this is the beginning, from a historical standpoint, this is the beginning. We see the names that are post-Babel. The name states are those that we find in the most ancient history or in archaeological digs. This is where the Bible and history converge. Now, there were various efforts at empires in Mesopotamia, for example, along the Nile Delta, but we really want to focus beginning at about 1000 BC, or that is 1,000 years before the time of Jesus and his ministry. At that time, David was king of the United Kingdom of Judah and Israel, and he took Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is going to be a very important in this development. And he intended to build a temple for God. Remember, prior to this, God's location, his presence was in the tabernacle. The tabernacle that was built by Israel at Mount Sinai, and led them through the wilderness journey and eventually into the conquest of the land. That tabernacle had been moved to various locations, but now David he moved the ark to Jerusalem, and he's going to build a temple for him there. God stopped him and said, no, you're not going to build a temple. Your special son is going to build a temple for my name. And so after David's days, his son Solomon succeeded him and indeed built the first temple on what we know today as the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Now this, in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 16, is where the Lord declares that I will establish my name in this particular site forever. Prior to this time, for the roughly 400 years from the wilderness journey all the way up to this point, God had said repeatedly, you'll worship at the place where I established my name, but now for the first time it's clearly established at this site that we know as the Temple Mount, where the temple was built. Now, at the same time that Solomon was building this temple, there was emerging a global empire in the upper reaches of the Tigris River. We know it as the Assyrian Empire. Its center ultimately was Nineveh. And the dates of the Assyrian Empire is about 900 BC to 625 BC. The Assyrians spread out militarily, conquered areas around them, took the whole of Mesopotamia, dominated Babylon or Babel, and indeed they moved westward, came down the coast of the Mediterranean, and they were moving to take the Jerusalem and Judah. However, they did surround Jerusalem, but God intervened and they were unable to take Jerusalem. And he drove them back. Actually, they fled back to Nineveh after God intervened at Jerusalem. Now, they did take the northern kingdom of Israel. By this time, Israel was a divided state, Judah and Israel in the north, Judah in the south. And so they did take the northern kingdom of Israel into captivity, but they never took the place where God established his name. Now, they had conquered Babel or Babylon, and eventually the Babylonians built their own army, and they rose up under a gentleman by the name of Nabopolassar, and they kicked off the control of the Assyrians, and their army marched north, and they overran Nineveh and collapsed the Assyrian Empire. And the Babylonians then spread out and conquered the same area of civilization that the Assyrians had, all of Mesopotamia. They went into portions of what's biblically known as Asia Minor, but would be modern Turkey, down the land bridge along the Mediterranean. They took Judah, destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, deposed the king, and led the Judeans off into captivity. This is the beginning of the Jewish exile from the land of Israel. Now, the Babylonians never managed to take Egypt, but as I remember, they did. The Egyptians did pay tribute to the Babylonians. The Babylonian Empire is a little bit more brief than most. It lasted only about 100 years. The Bible books that we would recognize immediately during the Assyrian Empire would be Isaiah and Joel, Micah, Isaiah, and possibly Joel. There's some question about the date of that one. And during the Babylonians, we have many books, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Obadiah. These are some of the books during the era of the Babylonian Empire. Now, to the east of Babylon was the Medes and the Persians. And so they arose, built their own army, and eventually overran the Babylonians in 539 BC. The Persians then spread, they spread eastward and also took the area, they would encompass areas like Afghanistan, and they moved westward, the whole of Mesopotamia. They moved down the land bridge. They took Israel, that area of Israel, and particularly they captured the site where God would establish his name forever, and they even penetrated into Egypt and captured Egypt. They attempted to move westward into Europe, but were fought off by the Greeks. Famous battles at Marathon in 490 BC and Salamis in 480 BC. So the Persians had a vast empire over most of the civilized world of their days. The biblical books during the Persian Empire would be Daniel, Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Now, I may have missed a couple of prophets, but not many of them. Now, at the Persians had attempted to capture Greece, but they were unable to, and the Greeks met them militarily and defeated them, sent them back eastward, and so eventually the Greeks arose, built their own army under Philip of Macedonia, and Philip had planned to move eastward and challenge the Persian Empire. Philip was assassinated, so his son Alexander, so-called Alexander the Great, took his army and did indeed march eastward. He took Asia Minor, he took Israel, the place where God had established his name, Jerusalem, Egypt, then backtracked and moved eastward across Mesopotamia all the way into India. So he, in fact, Alexander would have been the last major global empire in the likeness of Nimrod's Babel that controlled virtually all of civilization of his day. Now, I would point out quickly that China is also an ancient civilization that developed independently all the way up almost they were isolated almost up to the modern era. They were isolated by the Pacific Ocean, the Gobi Desert, and the mountains. Now I can't think of the name of the mountains. Doesn't matter. The mountain range that isolates them. Now, once the Greek Empire was established, and their dates would be from 330 to 30 BC, the Greeks did something different than all the other empires. Other empires, they military conquered an area. They charged taxes. They kept contingent of military units in those areas to put down rebellion, and they pretty much left things alone. Some of the more ancient empires swapped populations in order to disrupt them even more so. The Persians didn't do that, and so. But when the Greeks came along, the Greeks did something totally different in that wherever the Greeks went, they imposed Greek lifestyle and Greek philosophy. And so they were very successful in doing that. And so their world became a Greek world of their day. Now, I read a modern historian that said by the day, the whole world is a Greek world because it's patterned after the Greek pattern of philosophy and lifestyle. You go to any modern university, the various departments of study are the same as in ancient Greece. Now, to the west of Greece, the Romans were developing their armies. They fought 3 wars over 150 years with Carthage. The Carthaginians was a colony from ancient Phoenicia, and they controlled the Mediterranean Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. And the Romans challenged that. They fought 3 long wars with them, eventually overran the Carthaginians and destroyed them. And now Rome was in control of the Mediterranean. They marched eastward, and section by section or portion or parcel by parcel, they overcame the Greek Empire. We're particularly interested, one of the splinter groups off of Alexander's original conquest was the Seleucid Empire of ancient Mesopotamia, which also included Israel and the Jerusalem, the area where God had established his name. Now, one of the Greek rulers, Antiochus Epiphanes, attempted to apply Greek lifestyle and philosophy to the land of Israel, to the Jewish people that were living there in the day that had returned during the days of the Persian Empire, and the group that we know as the Maccabees rose up and formed their own militia, military, and in fact defeated a much superior Greek army and established semi-autonomy in Jerusalem, and cleansed the second temple that had been built there during the Persian era, and dedicated that temple, and we know that dedication as the festival of Hanukkah. But now in 64 BC, the Romans under Pompey conquered this area and collapsed the Seleucid kingdom and took control of Jerusalem and established Roman control there. And indeed, by the time that we get to Jesus' ministry, the Jewish people in Israel had been under Roman domination for about 100 years. And so it was they were very, very tough. It was a very odious time. And so when we read in the scriptures of Jesus ministering in this area, he's forever interacting with the Romans and the puppet government that the Romans had established in Jerusalem and in Judea. And in 66 AD, the Zealots, this is now 40 years after the ministry of Jesus, the party of Zealots won control of Jerusalem, and they rebelled against the Roman control again, and this led to the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 A.D. and the conquest of Masada in 73 A.D. We visited Masada on a number of occasions, and the fortress there is just unbelievable. Anyway, the Romans built a surge wall all the way up to it and managed to conquer it. The Jews remained in rebellion and fights back and forth with the Romans for the next 70 years, arose again 132 to 135 in the so-called Bar Kokhba revolt, and that ended in the complete destruction. Only a remnant of Jewish people were left in the land after that time. All the New Testament books were written during this early Roman era. Now, that leads us to what I think is what Satan chose as the perfect instrument to confound God's purpose, and that is Islam. Islam came into being because Muhammad, his lifespan 570 to 632 A.D., he supposedly received messages from an angelic messenger, and he was illiterate, so they were recited, and others wrote them down, and it became the Quran. And so Islam spread out from the Arabian Peninsula and eventually took Mecca. Mecca was a caravan crossroad in what's today Saudi Arabia, and there was a multitude of gods worshipped at Mecca. No matter where you're coming from, you could find your God there. So Muhammad took it and declared there's only one God, Allah, and he was the God at Mecca, and that became the center of Islam. Islam marched out of the Arabian Peninsula. The first area that they took was the land of Israel, and captured Jerusalem, the place where God has established their name. Now, there's some attributes of Islam we need to understand. One aspect is they must be proven or shown to be superior to any other religion. So whenever an Islamic army captures another area, they will build a Muslim place of worship over any place of worship of the captured area, whatever deity that happened to have been. So in Jerusalem, in the place where God said, I'll establish my name forever, they built the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock around 700 A.D. in that place. And they stand there till today, doing just what Islam desires them to do, and that is to declare to the world that Allah is greater than the God revealed in the Jewish and Christian Bibles. That is the mean. The other aspect of Islam is that the world in Islamic mindset is divided into two areas. Dar al-Islam, the territory already conquered by Islam, and Dar al-Harb, the area of warfare. So the vision of Islam is to convert all of the area of warfare, Dar al-Harb, into Dar al-Islam. In other words, global conquest. That is the vision of Islam. Now, any area that Islam has ever captured in the Muslim mind can never revert to what it was before. Now, again, Israel and Jerusalem was the first area outside the Arabian Peninsula that was taken by Islam, and so it can never revert to what it was before. That area has been controlled by Islam since the original conquest in 637 BC. Now, bringing us up to the more modern era, with the Industrial Revolution, nations, now by this time, civilization has spread, is virtually global. And for the first time since all the way back to Nimrod's Babel, or maybe we would look at Alexander's Greece, the whole of the civilized world could be brought under one control. And so we know of the British Empire at the turn of the 20th century. I'm sure you're familiar with the statement the sun never goes down on the British Empire. That just tells us how widespread the British Empire was until that time. Now, just as the British Empire was exerting its influence across the whole world, the Jewish people began to filter back into the land of Israel. The earliest settlements around 1880. Now, there's always been a small remnant of people there, but this was the beginning of the modern Zionist movement. And so, now remember, the area is still under Muslim control all the way through World War I. Well, during World War I, the Ottoman Turks allied themselves with the Germans and lost. And as a result of those, the Ottoman Empire was dissolved and the territory divided up into the conquering nation, and the land of Israel and Jerusalem fell under British control. Now, at the same time, more and more Jewish people are filtering into the land, the Zionist movement, and the population of Israel is building all of this time. By the end of World War II, and the remnant of the Holocaust, those also fed into the land of Israel. So the population surged to the point that Israel would become an independent nation again. And so as soon as Israel became an independent nation, the Muslim nations surrounding them, remember now, Israel is at the very heart of Dar al-Islam. All the Muslim nations declared war and tried to destroy them. Israel stood up and defeated them. That effort at warfare was repeated in the Suez conflict in 56, the Six-Day War in 67, the Yom Kippur War in 73, the Lebanese War in 82, and a continuing conflict up until the present warfare between Israel and Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in the north. And the effort is always the same, the destruction of Israel. Because of the tenets of Islam, Israel can never be reverted to in their minds to a sovereign Jewish state with Jerusalem under Jewish control. That is declaring that Allah is not superior to the God revealed in the Bible. Now, we all know of the conflict in the nations in this so-called Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Eventually, I believe all of the nations of the world, and unfortunately and regretfully, I believe the United States will join in that. The Bible says, Zechariah chapter 12, verses 2 and 3, that all nations will be gathered against Jerusalem and Judea, the Jewish people. And so that's what we are approaching today. I believe that the Biden administration was very much on I call it the Derek Harmageddo, the way to Armageddon. The Trump administration appears to be turning back from that. Hopefully they are. But the Bible is very clear. Eventually the nations will come under a unitary control as Nimrod's Babel, the so-called Antichrist government, will arise again and will attack. At that time, we believe that the Holy One of Israel will sovereignly intervene, as he did at Babel, and that army will meet the prince of the prince of God's army. If you back up to Joshua's day, the prince of the army of the Lord, of the hosts of the Lord. I plan to be among that host with Jesus when that conflict takes place. Where do you suppose you might be? You might think about that. Next week, we're going to look at Jesus' view of heaven and earth and complete this series. Thank you very much, and shalom.